This is another example illustrating the use of the if statement, referring to the voting example earlier in chapter 4 and extended later. You can see some of the code related to this on page 107 and the illustration in figure 4.8. The difference between figure 4.8 and this is that in figure 4.8 there's a layout in a square for A, B, and then C and D would be below this, but here I'm putting them in a line just for simplicity that way. So the idea is that when I click here, I'll pick up a vote for A. When I click in here, I'll pick up a vote for B, anywhere in here, and so forth. In the code, which has this layout all set up, this is called the A boundary, that's called the B boundary, and this is called the C boundary. They're separated by 150 pixels apiece, and the applet is 600 pixels wide. We also have instance variables for where these different text objects go. There's one that says 0 votes for A and so forth. And that we just care about the X coordinates. The Y coordinates are the same. They're 20 pixels down for each of them, and that's all set up. Most important things here are the instance variables for the count for A and B and C and D, and these text objects. This one is called info for A, info for B, and info for D. What we do in the begin method is we just lay out this picture, and these three lines are at these positions, A boundary, B boundary, and C boundary. Okay, so what we're left with is we have to write the event handler for mouse clicks. And the idea, of course, is that if we are to the left of the A boundary, we want to pick up the vote for A. So we check to see if the x coordinate of this point is to the left of A boundary. It's less than that. And of course what we want to do is update the count for A, so increment it. This won't do anything because we're not displaying anything. If I run this, if I click over here, something is happening. Count A is being incremented, but nothing is being displayed. So fix that easily enough by saying info A, info A dot set text, and let's write count A and concatenate that with that many votes for A. So what will appear in that text object is the number of votes for A and then the string votes for A right after it. So we run this and see that much of it works. So click over here. Let's always check that first. Nothing happens, but click over here and we pick up vote for A every time I click. Okay. So that's good. So to do the similar thing in the B region, we could just do exactly the same thing and see how that goes. So we'll have an if statement that checks to see if this is less than B boundary. Let's see. Okay. And increment the count for B, and similar thing for info B. B plus votes for B. Okay. And I compile this and run it and check to see that it works. Now, clicking on votes for C and D, nothing happens. Votes for B, it increments exactly as it should, and votes for A, it's incrementing as it should. But as you can see, there's a problem with votes for B. I'm clicking here, and this is being incremented when it should not be. So what's happening? What's happening is that when I am to the left of the A boundary, this is true, but so is this, because the B boundary is to the right of it. When I click in this region, I am actually to the left of the B boundary, so that's not good. So what I need to do is ensure that when I'm at this point where I'm updating the count for B, that this is false. There are a couple of ways to do that. One way is you can check to see that this is indeed false. Now, if this is not less than A boundary, then it must be greater than or equal to A boundary. So That's generally true. If something isn't less than something, it's greater than or equal to it. So greater than or equal to a boundary. And so we have one case where we use this Boolean operator. And that's true, then this should work. And it does, at least for those two things. Okay? So clicking on C, nothing happens, or B, but clicking on B, things work as they should. Clicking on A, also things work as they should, and this does not affect the votes for B. So that's one way to do it, and you might notice that these are two completely separate if statements, and in fact, if we format this, we see that the BlueJ editor knows that this count A++ is the only statement that's under the control of that if statement. And then this info A set text is outside of the scope of that, as is this. And actually, there's no reason why we couldn't take this and put it down here. Everything would work exactly the same in this particular case. You can see that. Everything's fine. There's a couple of problems with this. One is it seems natural that this should actually be somehow grouped with the increment in A. But there's also a question of efficiency, because if I increment the count to B and not the count to A, I should not be redisplaying the count to B. So that's not something that breaks the program, but it's not quite right. So we really should group these together in a compound statement. And similarly for the other ones. Like that. And that just makes things a little bit more sensible. Format that. And this will work exactly as it did before. Now, this is fine as far as it goes, but this Boolean expression is a little bit complicated. Although we have nothing against Boolean expressions, we're also in favor of simplicity. And there's an easy way to make it much simpler, and that is, instead of having this be a separate if statement from the first one, we can have it be in the else branch of the if statement there. So we could say instead else if. And if we put that in, this is perfectly syntactically correct, this is perfectly acceptable and it works. However, the way this works is that if this is false, then if we get to this point, this is guaranteed to be true. So we don't have to put that there at all. And we get a construct that is basically a nested if statement. You have this if nested in the else clause of the other one, but we think of it more as a multiple alternative if statement. That is, if this is true, we do this. Otherwise, if that turns out to be false, then we check this, and if that's true, we do these things. And looking at it this way, we can easily get this to work for C and D as well. All we need to do is copy this, make sure we change the B's to C's in the right places. Right. So let's see how that goes. As always, I'll click on D, make sure nothing happens. Click on C. Uh-oh, something bad is happening. I'm clicking on C and the votes for B are being updated. Click on B, the votes for B are being re-updated. So what did I do wrong? And you may very well have noticed that when I copied and pasted, I neglected to change all the B's to C's. And simple copying and pasting errors can really give rise to some strange looking behaviors. So this should work. Okay, nothing happens there. This is working fine, and that's working all right, and so is that. Okay. So we can get this completely working by doing another copy and paste. Like that. Except I want to change everything to D. Now, problem is, I'll change everything to D. Problem is, there is no variable called D boundary. And actually, I didn't have one because I don't need one. If something is in is to the right of the C boundary, that's good enough for us. So we can make this the default case of this if. So if this is true, we do that. If that's first thing is false, and this is true, we do this, and so forth. So this will work just as we want it to. Okay? Nothing to the right gets incremented, nothing to the left or right gets incremented if I click in any one of these regions. Doesn't matter where I click. Okay, so that's working just fine. One final thing to point out about this is that the order in which you put these things is all important. And let's see what happens if we break this. We change around the order. So let's interchange B and C. So we'll put the B over here. And see what happens. Of course, things are going to behave in a way that will first seem inscrutable, but with hindsight, we will know exactly what's happening. So D is going to work fine. A should work fine. But when I click on B, nothing happens. When I click on C, nothing happens as well. And why is that? Not actually what I intended. Because I wanted this to be C. That's still going to be wrong, but in a different way. Okay, so A is fine, D is fine, clicking on C is fine, but clicking on B, nothing happens for B, but it just happens for C. And why is that? Because if something is to the left of the B boundary, it's also going to be to the left of the C boundary. In other words, I never get to this point, because anything that's to the left of the C boundary, including these, will wind up executing this part of the code. So just restoring this to something that works. That's fine. That's what works. Okay. And this illustrates, it's a good example of the multiple alternative if statement, which is used basically for categorizing things. I'm looking at this point.getX and figuring out where it belongs.